HB 708. Rep. Freiberg, staff, will you read in the bill?
Next up, we have House Bill 708 by Representative Freiberg. Removes requirements that charter schools meet a certain threshold with respect to the number of students with exceptionalities and economically disadvantaged students relative to its total enrollment.
Rep. Freiberg, on your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, staff, for helping prepare this, and good afternoon, members. I think before we get started, do we want to go ahead and put that technical amendment? There's an amendment, very technical in nature.
Sure. Make a motion for the technical amendment. Staff, will you read them in?
Yes, ma'am. The amendment is Amendment Set 1300. Members, it's in your folders. It's also online. It is a technical amendment. Any reference in the bill to the term wait list, we're changing to waiting list. It's in 5 places of the bill, and that is the all it does.
Probably the easiest thing we've discussed all day.
I see no questions. I also just want to make a point of order to the audience and the people listening. There are reps that are probably not up here, but they're eating, but they can, they're watching, and they can hear all the testimony, so please know that as well. Okay, Rep. Freiberg, on your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As most of you in here know, charter schools have been around for almost 30 years, and for better or for worse, I've been associated with charter schools almost that entire time. When I was K-12 administrator for Bessie, it was in the infancy of charter schools, and at that time, Bessie ran all charter schools. So I have seen this from the beginning and see where we are now. And I can tell you that the original purpose of charter schools was to give parents an option, to let parents decide where they wanted to send their children. And this would be another option for parents and for children. It wasn't the only, but it was another one. And we have a diversity of types of charter schools, as Ms. Romer has already talked to you earlier about. We have everything from aviation to autism to adolescents who are at risk. Here in Baton Rouge, we have the Key Academy that services students with dyslexia. But we've been around for 30 years, and in 30 years there have been very few changes made to charter school law and charter school statute. We heard one change earlier today. You're going to hear many more. I think in a time where we see an education landscape changing dramatically, it's time to look at charter schools and what charter schools offer and what the statutes and laws around charter school are. I know that I have many comments I could make. I know there's going to be a robust discussion by so many people I know and respect so well, both pro and con. But I would like to set the table with allowing our charter school experts to tell us what is in this bill, what is not in this bill, so we can clarify some of the misinformation or some of the questions people may have. So I'm going to let these two folks speak.
Thank you, Rep. Freiberg.
You turn it off. It's red.
I'll just let you know that they're all staying on.
When I see red, I hit
know.
it. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I promise. I'm a quick learner.
Before you go, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing no objections, the amendment is adopted. Okay.
Hello again. Caroline Romer, Louisiana Charter Schools in Action. I'm going to be super brief. I am joined at the table by our legal and policy director who can really answer your questions and talk about some of the legal things. I'm just going to set the table, again, clarifying. Charter schools are public schools, and the law for charter schools is very clear that they are to be open enrollment schools and that certain federal and state laws apply to all charter schools, including civil rights, anti-discrimination, all of those things are in our law. So as we have this conversation, what I'm asking respectfully of the committee is just to continue to keep in your mind, we are public schools where no student is assigned to the school. They are choosing to be there. And I think that's an important piece of what it means to be a charter school. And so as we have that discussion, I'm here to both answer your questions and probably at times defend what we are attempting to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rimmer.
Good afternoon. I am Sarah Vandergriff Kelly. I'm the Legal Policy Director for the Charter School Association. I've been in this role for almost 13 years. Prior to me joining the association, I worked for a large law firm that represent one of our local school districts. So education also runs in my blood in this and my family of school board members and teachers. I would like to help answer any questions. From the get-go, I would like to, again, clarify what Ms. Rimmer said of charter schools are public schools. There's important terms that everyone needs to understand, particularly as it relates to SPED, of what is designated as LEA status. When you're state authorized, you are your own LEA, meaning that charter school, a Type 2 charter school, has the full responsibilities of a traditional school district. They are the equivalent thereof. So they wholeheartedly have to serve every student that walks through their door. If you are locally authorized, you cannot be your own LEA. You are by law right now prohibited from this. You fall under the district's LEA, and the charter school must comply, particularly with SPED services, in partnership with the district. They do that in the outlines of the charter contract as well as the policies. We have many school leaders here today, former school leaders and former representatives or former employees of the Department of Ed who can speak more to that if you'd like to hear from them of what does that look like. I can also tell you in my 12 years of experience of what actions actually take place when a charter school has been caught running afoul of discrimination practices or bad SPED practices. The Office of Civil Rights applies to charter schools. We have to adhere to every type of title you can imagine by federal regulations. We have even had special agent officers present at our conferences for professional development for our charter schools to ensure that everyone can stay up to date with their federal compliance. Title I, Title II, 504, SPED, you name it. We are public schools. Other instances of where we've seen things go awry, it has nothing to do with the actual enrollment quota that were the red flags. There are other red flags in place both at the state law and federal law. We've seen it happen 2 times already with charter revocations. On the one hand, a charter school in New Orleans, and I will say their name, they were public schools. This was all a matter of public record. It was Lanyap Academies in New Orleans under Recovery School District. They were found out to be creaming kids of what they want to say, pushing kids out. They had such an astronomically low percentage of when that they were submitting their forms, particularly MFP submissions and student counts. It was the red flag. The Department of Ed came in and shut that school down. Sorry. The other instance is on the opposite side of when you had someone over-identifying SPED students in order to take advantage of the additional federal dollars, and it turns out they were not serving those kids. That school was in Jefferson Parish, Smothers Academy, and that was shut down. So when we think about this bill, this law, the quota actually causes harm. It causes harm to families, and it causes harm to SPED students. And again, we have folks here who can explicitly tell you how that harm occurs. When we think about how do we improve charter law, Representative Freiberg's
Mrs. Kelly,
bill,
since the timer went out, yeah, hopefully somebody will ask that question. We'll be able to continue to state that.
I get very passionate on this issue.
But Rep. Young has a question for you. So,
hey, thank you, Rep. Freiberg, for bringing this bill, and thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask a few questions. So my first question is, and this may be better for you, Ms. Romer.
Sure.
Why did Louisiana initially require the enrollment quotas some 30 years ago? I think that's what was quoted.
Well, believe it or not, I've been around a long time, Rep. Young, but not 30. I was born then and I was old then.
I was thinking maybe you got some stories from your dad.
I have been in my current role, I'm the founder of the association, so it's been 16 years. So in all seriousness, I was not present for that conversation. But my guess is at the time, and you can look at current charter law, it references charters as a demonstration program and specifically uses the word experiment. So I believe 30 years ago, in an effort to, again, make certain assurances, probably to school districts, to be honest, that a choice was coming into their area and that they wanted some guardrails around how students would be enrolling in those schools, is my guess. I will say, though, initially the law specifically said at-risk students. We've done so, and at-risk incorporated lots of different categories. Free and reduced lunch, it included SPED, it can include overage, homeless, students that are parents. There's a whole list that is defining at risk. We, a few years back, I think under Representative Pat Smith, who's no longer in this body, changed the word from at risk to economically disadvantaged. And so, again, there is still remaining a long list of things that qualify for economically disadvantaged. And then a few years ago, Senator Dan Claytor, also no longer in the body, pulled out of law SPED. And so he broke it into, there was a time where your quota was incorporating a number for all that category, and I'm sure Senator Claytor will speak to it. He pulled out SPED, so now there are quotas both on economically disadvantaged and for SPED.
Okay. That you want to add, Rep?
Well, I was going to say, since I was around, it was because it was new and it was experimental, and I think they wanted to reflect what was in the district to make sure that the charters did do that. And I think Ms. Romer has explained it pretty well.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
And may I say one thing, too, just for the committee? We did email you earlier a report. It's Office of Civil Rights on the guidelines that charters have to follow. So just for your learning.
Okay, and Rep. Yo, you can get back in the queue, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Rep. Brass?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions for the sake of time. I won't definitely be long, Madam Chair. But what are the percentages now that charter schools have to meet in reference to disadvantaged students or students with exceptionalities?
The number is a percentage of what is currently the percentage in your traditional public school system. So if you are locally authorized, whatever the percentage of economically disadvantaged and SPED is for your district, that is what has to be reflected in the charter school at a level of 85%.
Okay, so holistically, a charter school as a system as a whole, during the intake process, how do they come about meeting those quotas? How can you identify, or do you identify through an application process, a student that's maybe disadvantaged socially, or a child with exceptionality? Are those questions specifically asked, or go by like some type of zip code, or what's the process?
So that is part of the problem when we talk about how the quota actually is causing harm for families. So because of this law, charter schools, Louisiana charter schools are the only school in Louisiana and are the only school in the country that now actually have to ask families for their private economic disadvantage information as well as for their SPED information at the application stage of the enrollment in the public charter school. For all other types of schools, that information does not occur until after you do enrollment. But what's happening is because in order for charter schools to try to comply with this quota standard, they tell parents, well, if you want an advantage in the lottery system, you need to tell us this information because you'll get an advantage in the lottery.
Because legally, we actually are not allowed to ask ask a family to share with us on an application the IEP status of their student. That is against the law. So it is a voluntary submission of information by a parent, but as Ms. Kelly said, the charter is actually having to say to the parent, if you give me this information, then we can put you in a priority in our lottery, if we have to run a lottery. That's another thing. Again, I know just not everyone understands charters. So again, open enrollment, tuition-free public schools. By law, a charter school must have an application window that is no shorter than a month, no longer than 3 months. There is no first come, first serve. You collect all of your applications in your application window period. At the end of that period, if you have more applications than you have seats, you must run a lottery. And you'll see that our law addresses some of the lottery issues.
And one last quick question.
Okay, yes.
So it was to implement universal ESAs, and we was to remove this requirement as far as certain students going to the charter schools. How will we prevent certain charter schools from cherry-picking kids and not allowing certain types of kids to go in? So to ultimately prioritize kids from certain zip codes or whatever, being that they're coming from somewhere with this pretty much voucher, how do we prevent students or families from being allowed to attend a certain school if we don't have these measures in place?
I think it's a very good and a legitimate question and concern to have. I think you can answer that several ways. One, this bill itself is pointing to the fact that we don't believe quotas actually provide the protections that students by law should have. So our bill expands the anti-discrimination clause in charter law to include economically disadvantaged students, as well as I said, some requirements around lotteries and providing information to families and those sorts of things. This bill does do. The most powerful entity involved with the charter school, beyond the parents making decisions and the educators, is the authorizer. The authorizer is who sets the agreement between the charter and the school board and/or the state. It is through that authorization that the authorizer can set the terms and expectations inside that contract that they want the charter school to meet. It could include reporting out on certain special groups, special populations within your school. It could be, we've seen authorizers insert themselves around transportation. If a charter isn't providing transportation, that could be seen as a barrier for certain kids to be able to go into the school. The bottom line is the authorizer has full authority, and this bill does not take that away from them, to decide what the charter schools in their portfolio of schools should look like, how they should be enrolling those students and doing that. And they can take corrective action if they feel that they are seeing data or getting complaints that the charter school is not following federal and state laws related to anti-discrimination.
And to that point, when we talk about charter school accountability, we mean accountability. And there have been times that schools absolutely have been shut down when they have gone too far. And they have been shut down a very quick, like 1 to 2 years period, not existing for a long time. So when we mean we are held accountable, we mean we are held accountable.
And I would just quickly add that I think early in the charter school process, we did see that creaming, but I do think the accountability that's been put in place has helped us avoid that.
Okay, and that's my biggest concern, Representative, that if we remove these requirements, that ultimately when we have this open ESAs, universal, that certain schools may utilize this as a tool to cherry pick and not, and like you say, discriminate against some kids because of their background, because of some issue that they may have, ultimately because we implemented something like this. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Rep. Young.
Okay. So to follow up around the enrollment quotas, I'm looking here and it says that this is from the legislative auditor saying that typically charters are required to enroll about 85% of socially economic disadvantage from their communities. Is that
As well as the SPED.
okay? And according to this, from 2016 to 2022, an average, there was about 18.5% of charters not meeting that requirement. What was the consequence of them not meeting that requirement?
The report you're referencing, I'm familiar with. I would point out that we don't fully agree with the report in some of the schools that it's included in that report. Some of the schools it's included are in New Orleans, and New Orleans charter schools do not run their own enrollment process. All New Orleans charter schools are part of a common enrollment, so they are blind to those applications and that sort of thing. So there are some schools in that number that, in our opinion, should not be in the number. There's also some schools in that number who have special mission schools, which the law allows for, and so a little dispute on that, but to your point, there are some that are not in compliance, and your question was, what are the consequences to that? And again, almost 70% of the charter schools in Louisiana are actually authorized by local school boards. And it's the local school board charters that are actually more out of compliance sometimes than Bessie has been. My point will be, it is in the power of the authorizer to insert themselves as the other partner on the contract to keep a school in compliance. And there are multiple ways they can do that. Everything from when it comes time to renew a school, they can say you did not meet these standards and we're dinging you in your renewal. They could even not renew. A charter can be anywhere from 3 years to 10 years. The higher, the longer you have that agreement or charter, the more it is that you are excelling. The lower the number, the less.
Okay, so I got some other data on this, and no, 85% is generally the threshold that charters are supposed to meet, but the other data says on average about 76% is what they're meeting. Why not just lower the threshold to accommodate for the changes that have happened over the last few decades? Why get rid of it altogether?
Well, again, the point we are making is that we are public schools and by law are open enrollment, and that by law we must follow all federal and state laws related, again, to civil rights, anti-discrimination, and you are asking charter schools to seek sensitive and private information from families who are choosing to apply for, not being forced to, choosing to apply, and you want us to ask for something from them that no other schools are required to ask for. And so the work should not be on the front end of the application, because law dictates how that application should be, what it should be blind to, the lotteries. The work that the authorizer needs to be doing is checking the data. And just because there are numbers that don't fully align, and if you look at that report, some of the schools that they're calling out miss it by a student. Mm-hmm. Sometimes 2 students. So those disparities don't equal discrimination.
Okay.
Right? And so they should be looking as an authorizer at that data and making determinations of, do they feel like there is something happening in that building that doesn't serve students well.
All right.
Madam Chair, I just have one other question, and I'll be brief.
We'll brief. Because
Okay. All right. So in your legislation, the lottery is only triggered if there's a maximum of applications. Is that correct?
Correct.
So how do we ensure transparency in that system, in that we know whether or not there was a true maximum of applications versus it just being reported and we admit who we want to admit?
A good question. So charter schools, when they're authorized, the authorizer puts inside the contract the number of students that charter school can serve, and by law, you are not allowed to serve more. So an authorizer has all the information they need to know through the MFP, other reporting, where they can see how many seats are available in that school, and they could do their own matchup to, here's the number of applications, and here, again, is what the enrollment calls for.
And this bill actually further strengthens, to your point in the question. Previously, it just referenced the term lottery. So what this bill does is actually go and says, you have to tell us what the mechanism is, when it's being held, every parent has to be notified, not just of when it's being held, but the results. It has to stand up to an audit. So when we thought about what actually can be improved and be a better safeguard for families, we actually based it upon the current lottery system of the Discovery School systems, charter schools. Collectively, Discovery Schools has a 2,000 student wait list. They absolutely know they can be sued at any moment if someone thought that they were doing nefarious things with the lottery. And so we absolutely followed their best practices around enrollment transparency so that every parent knows I got a fair shot and that there were not political games at play in terms of the enrollment in this school.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rep. Young and Rep. Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. I want to make sure that I have this straight in my head. So there is a charter school very close to my home. And so you're saying that currently that school has to have a certain quota of, socioeconomically disadvantaged students or SPED students based on, I'm from Lafayette, so Lafayette Parish's demographic makeup?
Yes, and not just one school. What happens is
The entire
you take
parish.
the entire school district, not parish, the school district, which the school district itself, from school to school, will have different percentages, but they are giving us a combined average for our charter.
So all we're talking about today really is, if I understand, I heard this earlier, and it was new to me, that charter schools are public schools, but just a different form of public schools. If in my instance, right, I like to put things in very practical, real-world scenarios. If instead of a charter school having been built there, it was what I would call a traditional public school, they would not have to meet those requirements or quotas. It would be based on who is zoned for that school, and if they did not meet the socioeconomic numbers that this charter school has to meet, or the SPED numbers, that's perfectly fine. And all we're talking about today is leveling the playing field between what I'm calling, probably incorrectly, but traditional public schools and charter schools.
Got it right, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I wanted to make sure I understood that. I appreciate it.
Thanks for making that point, because that was a point I was going to make earlier. Yes.
I'm not very smart. I like to make things very simple and real world, and so that helps me understand. This is a school 2 minutes down the road, so I can picture the school, and I'm like, wait, if this was a traditional school built there, we're not even having this conversation, and they don't have to meet all of these requirements. Why would we impose these same requirements on a charter school? So I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Carlson. Rep. Young.
So one follow-up question on my question about the lottery system and the maximum minimum deal. Because it's a public school, would those records regarding applicants be a matter of public record? I know the demographic information may have to be redacted.
But I actually don't know. Sarah, do you know?
I would have to ask the other school leaders that may come up. I would have a feeling because the lottery itself, that will be a matter of public record. Like, it has to stand up to an audit. Like, it has to show enrollment transparency. So I would think to some extent that there is a public record, particularly around the lottery. And that is what our bill is trying to do, is to make sure when you run the lottery, you're doing it to the highest level of transparency standards.
Yeah, and so I think we're just kind of not super sure on that point. So I'd hope.
Does it make sense, though, what she's saying, that as when you run lotteries, that, I mean, I actually don't know. I would have to ask the other school leaders that may come up. I would have a feeling because the lottery itself, that will be a matter of public record.
Yeah.
And so I would think to some extent that there is a public record, particularly around the lottery. So that oftentimes you have a third party, like a CPA firm, some type of entity is running that lottery for you. So I think you're right to be talking about, again, how do we drive transparency around those processes to ensure that
Right.
you're doing the right thing.
Because even with the lottery, it's not triggered unless you have more than what you said in your contract that you were going to have, right? So essentially, we would never. Let's say you said I'm going to enroll 300 kids. You reported that you only got 250 applications. We would never know, right? Is that right? Yeah. So.
Well, I think that if your authorizer doesn't ask you and doesn't check that, they would not know. My point is the authorizer is in a place of authority to direct the charter through the operating agreement and policies around what they would want to see.
Yeah, so I mean, I know what you're trying to do, and I understand. It's been decades, and so this policy probably needs to be changed. But I think that the greatest concern is going to come around public transparency, because folks are worried about. I've gotten emails. Folks are worried about charter schools cherry picking kids and not really serving the.
There's, if I may, there's 4 ways that this bill tries to strengthen enrollment transparency. One is in the contract terms between the charter school and the operator. How specifically are you going to serve SPED and economically disadvantaged students? That will be put into the contract. So that then becomes enforceable for the authorizer. The second, we are actually adding economically disadvantaged students to the list of protected class to which you cannot discriminate against. So again, we are now adding another level of protection for those families. The third, when a parent goes to apply to a charter school, you shall receive application information and all information on the website. Fourth, the lottery information, the transparency around the lottery, and the parent notifications about how the lottery was executed.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Young. Rep. Brass.
Thank you. 2 quick questions, Madam Chair, I promise.
We have a lot of cards, so.
Let me lose my train of thought. I guess a couple questions. At what point does the lottery process start? So meaning, say you guys are asking for this personal information on the front end voluntarily. Does the lottery process start once you identify the 85%? And then you start the lottery, or does the lottery process start from
No,
ground
the
zero?
lottery starts when your window closes, and all applications are included in that window, including any students that have filled out the information, IEP, economically disadvantaged, if they've chosen to do that. They're in the pool, and what can happen is a lottery could get weighted, where it's giving, instead of 1 ping pong ball in the basket, you get 1.2 ping pong balls. Based on, again, whatever that criteria is that your authorizer or the law has allowed you to do or requires you to do. So, for example, charter schools, probably like traditional public schools, will give priority to siblings. So if I'm in a charter school and then I have a sibling coming up through that school, they would get 2 ping pong balls, or they would get priority in the list that way. Does that make sense? Am I answering it well?
It answered it.
Okay.
Great. So I'm assuming the authorizer is the school district. We keep saying authorizers.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Correct?
Yes, it can be 2 different entities. You could be authorized by your local school board. So when I say authorizer, it could be your school board, or you could be authorized by the State Board of Education, BESE, and that's a certain type of charter school. That's a type 2 charter school that is done at the BESE level.
So my question is, if my school district made a decision based upon these requirements, this 85% requirement of kids being allowed to go there, will they have the opportunity to opt out if this bill passes?
I think that would be between the applicant, or the charter applicant, and at that time, they would be negotiating agreements. So they would be, the approved charter applicant would negotiate those terms with their board, but nothing in this bill prevents the board, the authorizer, from determining what makes the most sense for the students they're responsible for serving.
And when a school district authorizes a charter, do they do it for a specific amount of years, like a 5-year contract?
Yes, it's dictated in law. Your first contract as a charter is for 5 years.
Okay.
after that first contract, your contract can be anywhere from 3 to 10 years and should be based on your performance metrics.
Okay.
And again, I remind you, 68% of charters in this state are authorized by local school boards. So when we talk about this issue, they have a responsibility and role around oversight to those schools.
Okay. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Rep. Brass. Okay, the board is clear. I'm going to bring up 3 at a time for green cards present and would like to speak. Ben Lemoyne with the Department of Education, Dr. Kevin Gutierrez with Discovery Health Science Foundation, and Millie Harris with JCFA.
Good afternoon again, Ben Lemoyne with DOE and representing Bessie. The board does support this bill. One of the reasons is they believe that parents should not be asked to disclose their personal financial information and personal income simply for their child to apply to any school. And also, as others have mentioned, the board believes accountability measures have been put in place and implemented to avoid the creaming or the cherry picking or any kind of discrimination. So again, Bessie does support this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Again, Dr. Kevin Gutierrez, Discovery Health Sciences Foundation. This bill simply shifts energy to, I think, some of the following areas. One, focus on the communicating and sharing the mission of our charter school movement, inviting the community to participate and engage, and also to foster and allow open access and absolute choice through the admissions process. At Discovery, as you may have heard, we accomplished through a transparent lottery process whereby members of the community are able to apply from October 10th to February 2nd, so a large period of time, regardless of background or academic achievement level. This year, this open, transparent process resulted in us having 2,000 names on our wait list. That's both demand and choice in action. In all actuality, prodding parents for sensitive information, whether that be IEP information, personal income, seems both invasive and, quite frankly, suspicious. I would lean on existing federal laws, LDOE guidelines related to special education or other areas, if there are areas of concern. And as was mentioned before, the authorizers have full control and opportunity to question, prod, hold us accountable if we're not doing what we have to do. Again, I continue to hold charters accountable for outcomes in exchange for autonomy and endeavor to remove red tape that detracts from doing so. And this proposed bill does just that.
Mr. Gutierrez, we have a question. Rep. Young?
Yes, and this may be, I know Mr. Lemoyne, he said that Bessie has some policies to ensure transparency. I wanted to hear more about that, but I did have a question for you. And just generally around the conversation we're having about parents disclosing information. You know, we're saying it's evasive, we're saying it's unfair. In traditional public schools, they also have to disclose that information for free and reduced lunch. Is that not correct?
Oh, sure, and we do so in the enrollment. So let me clarify the process in which we are taking applications from someone who is a prospective student versus enrollment process of, okay, you take the seat, and now I'm engaged in giving the information that's necessary. 2 different periods. And so, you know, having a conversation between a principal, a special education coordinator, or whatnot, and a family around the IEP of a student, totally different scenario.
So we're not saying that, I mean, parents don't give their information to schools, whether public or private. I mean, to get Title I funding, free and reduced lunch, I mean, you got to give your information, right? Economic information, you know, even some programs require that, you know, even to go to college, if you want to get a first-time college attendee scholarship, you got to disclose that, you know, your parents never attended college. So the giving of the information is not necessarily invasive. It's when you have to give it.
Thank you for that clarification. You're exactly right. And we engage with parents when it's appropriate after they've been admitted to the school.
And is this measure the only way to get around that? This bill, is this the only way to get around that?
This provides clarification and, I think, red tape reduction in doing so, without a doubt.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep.
Thank you, Rep. Mrs. Harris?
Hi, good morning again. Millie Harris with JCFA Schools. And I just want to share a few things because I've been a charter school leader for 14 years. So I've been here for half of this process. I have both a Type 1 in partnership with Jefferson Parish Public Schools, which is our oldest, and then 2 Type 2s, one in the Lafayette region and one on the East Bank of Jefferson Parish. We serve a population that is almost 100% at risk because we're working with students who are in danger of dropping out or who have dropped out. And I say almost 100% because we're a public school. So I can't deny the enrollment of a right age, right grade student. And I've had those students enroll with us because we offer an accelerated pathway to the high school diploma. It's hard sometimes to look at a student who has resources and think to yourself, boy, I wish she wouldn't enroll, because I know that they're going to do great on tests. I know they're going to do really well, but that's not who I'm designed to serve. In 2014, this legislative body passed Act 833, known as April Dunn, and JCFA was the first school in the state to graduate a student underneath that act. We continually serve students who need our support. I told you earlier that we were an opportunities honoree, which means that we're in the 90th percentile for serving students who are underserved. But I'm only one of 11 charters who received that designation this year. Charter schools want to serve all students. We want the opportunity to create a space of choice within public education. My parents worked very hard to give us an opportunity to go to a really great high school in New Orleans. You shouldn't have to pay to go to a good school. You should have choice in public education. So I believe in charters extensively. This gives us the opportunity not to ask those questions and not to have to dig into someone's personal space before they are entered into our school. And it really is a process. We have on our application an optional page for families to fill out so that we can get this information. And no, I don't have a problem meeting this quota. We meet it all the time because of the populations that we serve. But I also know that there are other schools that have to spend the time gathering this information and encouraging folks to share information that they may not want to give. And believe me, and I know you know because you've worked in education, sometimes parents don't want to give you that information, even when you tell them, if you give us this information, we can get more Title I dollars to serve your kids. They don't necessarily want to share that. So to ask someone to share that when you haven't promised them a seat is maybe not fair, right? And you ask about whether or not your applicants would be open to public records requests. Yes, they are. Just like your enrollment is, just as someone calls the school and asks, is a student enrolled there? That is directory information. That is public information. So it is available. And one last thing, I'll be quick.
Real quick.
Yeah, the DOE now requires for Type 2s to provide a quarterly update on your waiting list. So you have to report to the Department of Education how many students you have on your wait list so they do know who is applying.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And members, I just want, we need to be at the floor around 2 o'clock. We still have a lot more green cards and red cards, and I want to make sure we give enough time to the opposition, so if y'all can just keep that in mind. So I'm going to bring up 3 more present and would like to speak in support. Dr. Ken Ducote with GNO Collaborative Charter Schools, Jonathan Mann Beekman Charter School, Dana Henry for self. You can go.
Ken Ducote, Executive Director, Greater New Orleans Collaborative Charter Schools. Just one more thing to mention, and that's a practical sense. One of the key points on the charter schools is that they're schools of choice. Parents are choosing to send their children to the school. If you have several charter schools, the way that parents are choosing the schools are not necessarily the same. You may have because they're choosing the one closest to their home. They may be choosing to apply to one where they know a particular teacher or coach is a good mentor of children and their child needs a lot of mentoring. They may be interested in STEAM instead of STEM, or whatever the reason is. Their choices are not the same for all parents. So therefore, when they make those choices don't necessarily line up to the same things that the quotas expect the schools to follow. So you have to remember that it's two sides. One is on the receiving side from the school, and the other thing is the parental choice. And when you start affecting coming up with quotas that schools are being held accountable for, you're not really considering the notion of the importance of choice. Thank you.
Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Samantha Mann. Sorry, I look like Jonathan. I'm the executive director of Beekman Charter School, and I'm here on behalf of my parents who do not like to provide that sensitive information when they choose to come to my school. It actually adversely affects my student population because I have a number of students who would fall into the economically disadvantaged category, yet their parents don't volunteer that information during the application process. So I have students who may not get in to my school, even though they meet the same criteria as the other ones, simply because they weren't on a list provided to me by my LEA. And as far as the accountability goes, I can promise that my LEA, Morehouse Parish School District, holds me accountable for every single thing that we do on our campus. And so that's why I'm here supporting House Bill 708. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have two more. President would like to speak. Clint Eby, and I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, and Ken Campbell. Ken. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, there he is. Yeah. Okay. Just make sure you state your name for the record.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Clint Eby. You got it right, a lot closer than Representative Mellerin got Millie's, so I appreciate that. I'm here today as a former charter school principal and also as a employee of the Department of Education, where I served as Director of Charter Accountability, kind of served that authorizer role. I appreciate the intent behind the original law as written to ensure that students with disabilities and economically disadvantaged students were taken care of. But I'm here in support of 708, and I hope that my experience as a school principal and as an authorizer can shed a little light on the impact of the current process. As a principal, when families first begin exploring a charter school as an option, oftentimes it's the curiosity stems from a point of frustration or a bad experience they had with their traditional public school. And when they come to me as a charter school, they're often hesitant to share that information, whether it's economically disadvantaged or a student with a disability. The fear seems to stem from an idea that their past experiences are going to be replicated at the current school. And asking parents and families to share this information, this deeply personal information, is often counterproductive as it taints the relationship between the parent and the school with distrust from the start. The school where I was principal was a 7th through 12th grade school. I loved this grade configuration because we had them for 6 years and we really got to see those students grow and develop. And part of that development often entailed students developing skill sets and strategies that made them more independent and less reliant on the accommodations written in their IEP. And we would often have parents, as students grew and became juniors or seniors, that would say, I think we're ready to discontinue services. Their students doing well, the grades are good. I don't think we need the IEP anymore. And I would generally agree with that. But in the back of my mind was this thought that, well, if this happens 3 or 4 times, I'm going to fall below that quota. I'm going to fall below that threshold. We would always do what we thought was in the best interest of the students. But it was a thought, and a principal shouldn't have to consider that. From an authorizer's perspective, the law already prohibits discrimination. You've heard that charter schools are public schools. And the law is already pretty clear. Authorizers have plenty of tools in their toolbox with which to address schools that are not following the law. And if we take a larger step back, like one of these two statements must be true. Either you have bad actors in this space or you do not. If you do not have bad actors in this space, then this law is really irrelevant. If you do have bad actors in this space, you're arming them with information they need in order to act badly. So this information shouldn't be required for families to give prior to securing a seat at the school. Thank you.
Whoever wants to go next.
You want me to go? Yeah. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Dana Henry, and thank you for taking some time today to hear my testimony, and as well as others here who have some comments and testimonies to give on this bill. I have been affiliated with charter schools since about 2009 when I was asked to serve on a charter school board in New Orleans. And since that time, I've become intimately involved with the purpose of charters and what they have been able to do, not just in New Orleans, but I think statewide. And there's 4, and currently I have a son who is in a charter school as well, and he should be graduating next year. Working with that. But there's four common principles, I think, that we've been able to work on through the years. Transparency, accountability, equity, and access. And I want to use my time today to speak specifically to, because you've heard from Ms. Kelly and Ms. Romer and Representative Freiberg on transparency and accountability and from a fairness standpoint, requiring charter schools to do certain things in terms of targeting certain populations and requiring certain documentations in a lottery that some other schools may not have to. But really the access piece is what I want to really focus on as a parent and someone who's worked with parent advocacy for various organizations since 2013. It is difficult sometimes. There is a certain pride that parents have, whether it's a pride in poverty or a pride in raising scholars with exceptionalities where they don't want to disclose some information because they don't want to wear that necessarily as a scarlet letter. They want to be able to apply for a school, an open enrollment public charter school, so that their scholars can get in and have the best opportunities and options available that any other scholars around the state would have, whether it's a traditional district public school or private school. This bill specifically removes that barrier in terms of them being forced to provide documentation that could impact their pride as a parent and possibly put them at the back of the line for entrance and access to an open enrollment public charter school. The other access point that I did want to bring up that I'm sure will come up later is the notification portion of the bill, that with the lottery system, parents sometimes are working 2 and 3 jobs just to provide for their scholars. This bill, if approved, will provide a notification component to it that if they do move from number 10 or number 12 to number 2 or 3, that they will receive adequate notice from the school, charter school, when they're conducting the lottery as well. So I just wanted to make sure that those points are raised and highlighted, and to say that this does remove one of the biggest obstacles that are one of the 4 tenets, in my opinion, of charter schools, which is access. And I would ask the committee to report this favorably.
Thank you so much.
Hello. My name is, I'm sorry. My name is Kenneth Campbell. I had the honor of being the first charter school director for the Louisiana Department of Education in 2007. Been working with charter schools way more than 30 years, started back in Washington, D.C. I think you've heard a lot of information today. There are 3 things I think that are really important, though. The first is the way that the law is written now, I think, creates an awful catch-22 for schools and authorizers. On the one hand, it says these are schools of choice and nobody could be assigned to them. And on the other hand, we say, well, we're going to give you this quota and you got to have this many kids. I think it's incredibly difficult to do if, in fact, you cannot assign. And the reality is that there are some schools that some parents simply do not want to go to. It has nothing to do with the fact that the school is trying to keep them out. It is just not appealing to me and my family, or the location is not one that I want to send my kids to. So there could be multiple reasons for that, but when we're trying to constantly force kids into a school and we have that expectation that they may not want to go to, I think it's always difficult. The second one, I think, is that oftentimes parents who apply to charter schools are applying to multiple schools, and it is always a challenge to get them to give that same information to this school and this school and this school. You start to worry about who has your information and what do they do with it. The second thing is that many families believe that if I give you this information and you know that I'm poor, chances are you're going to keep me out of the school. So the parents actually would prefer not to give this information, for it to truly be blind and me to have a real opportunity to go to the school. And then the third one, I think, is just to always remember the incredible schools that have been created for the very kids that we worry about through the charter school vehicle. You heard Millie Harris today talk about JCFA and a school that is specifically for kids at risk of dropping out. You have Opportunities Academy in New Orleans, which works with disabled students from the age of 18 to 22, Louisiana Key Academy with dyslexic students, the Emerge School for autistic students. So people are really using this vehicle of charter schools to do great things, again, for the very kids that we're worried about. I think, there was a lot of reason to have this at the very beginning, but I think we are at the place now where our charter school law has matured. I think we know a lot more than we used to know, and I think this is a provision that's actually not helpful at this time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming to the table. Oh, Rep. Young has a question.
I do have a follow-up question.
I'm sorry.
No.
Trying to get out of here, man.
I know. Thank you guys for being here. I know we've been here all day. Real quick, you talked about the obstacles that charter schools face because of this policy. Specifically, what are the obstacles? So, are the charter schools that you work with, are they suffering in enrollment numbers?
It depends. I work personally with charter schools statewide. Some have some challenges meeting their enrollment targets for various reasons. Some of them are new charters to certain areas, but less about the challenges that the charter operators are having. My testimony is primarily from the parents' perspective of the barriers that exist for them to apply to a school without disclosing certain information, as well as being notified about their standing in the lottery process. We could probably spend a lot of time on why some charters have enrollment challenges for various different reasons from various geographic regions, but my testimony was mostly about the access of parents, the barriers that exist for them.
And I only ask because my experience is a little different. Mm-hmm. I haven't encountered parents that didn't want to get into charter schools because they had to give their information. I just haven't seen that. Mm-hmm. The parents that I've seen have been eager to bring their kids to charter schools, and I think they appreciate the fact that charter schools are serving those kids that probably are not successful in other schools. I know I'm on a time limit, so I want to ask you your question.
Yes, sir.
You talked about, and maybe, I don't know how you meant it, in what context you were saying it, but you said because of this policy, we're forcing kids into schools they don't want to be in. How is that?
Well, I think that's what the quota kind of essentially wants to do, right? If it says you have to be at this percentage and you're not there, then the only way to get there is try to convince more people to come who have already said, I don't necessarily want to go. Right? And so if, in fact, you are fully enrolled, or even if you have space, and if a parent does not want to be in that school, and you don't have parents who want to be there, how does the school get to this quota? You understand what I'm saying?
I know what you're trying to say, but again, my experience in the space has been a bit different. I've never seen a school force a parent to stay. In fact, we're like, if you want to go, go. So
Yeah.
what instances are we forcing parents to?
Well, I don't necessarily think we're forcing. I think the concept, though, when we put a quota in, right, it says you need to meet this number, right? If nobody is there to meet the number, then how do you get there? Unless you force somebody to go, or unless you say to the school, hey, go talk to them some more. Go try to convince these people to come because they're not coming, right? And so that's what I mean by forcing them.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Young. Okay, the board is clear. For time's sake, we have 14 green cards. I'm not going to read them in, but they will be read into the record. And so we will move on to opposition. So President would like to speak. I'll call you up in threes. Dan Clater with Vin Clater and self. Danny Garrett was in opposition. He's no longer here. I don't know if...
He's on the road.
Michael Falk, are you here? No. Also present would like to speak in opposition, Ashley McReynolds, ARC of Louisiana, and let me see if I get this right the third time, Tanya Nyman, and with self. Okay.
All right. Members of the committee, first time I've appeared before you when I wasn't Senator Clater. I was in education for 7 years. I recently went to confession, and the priest told me that it looked like I was going to spend some time in purgatory, but the good news is the 7 years I did in education count toward my time in purgatory. So I appreciate your service. In 2015, I became friends, actually in 2019, with Ashley and other members of the DD community and folks that educated me on all the issues as it relates to children with disabilities. And I was totally ignorant of the facts and the things and the obstacles that they had to overcome. In 2015, I brought the bill that Barbara's trying to repeal today, and it was based on a little teeny bit of background. If you took the MFP and the different pieces that you put in, ordinary students, poor students, gifted students, let me see who the rest of them are. They could help me out here. Career and technical, and the other students, when you get the weighted average, that was the student count. And what was happening was, not that they were doing it necessarily on purpose to start off with, but the charters were taking the full count that had all those different pieces in it, and the kids with disabilities were being left behind in the public schools with less resources that went to the charter schools. I support choice. I wanted to do that. Caroline's a friend of mine. Her dad and her brother, friends of mine. But we were bleeding off the resources from the public schools into the charter schools, and they weren't taking their share, and they weren't reporting. So apparently, there's been a huge change of heart within the charter school community, and they're doing the right thing, and they don't even need to be required to do the right thing anymore by the legislature, who's the body that's supposed to hold them responsible. Just get rid of this old law, and we're going to do good, and it's not going to be a problem. I'm kind of Reagan, trust but verify. Let's see that you're actually doing your share. If we eliminate the entire section, and if you look at your bill, page 6, line 7, it says we're going to repeal 1739-91 in its entirety. Not going to be any more reporting. You're not going to have the report from the Department of Education about how many kids are in there. Representative Carlson, you asked about a school in your district. If you ask me a question, I'll answer it for you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ashley.
Rep. Almaday has a question.
Ooh, okay. That's loud.
Welcome, Senator Claytor. I think you keep the title for life, right, Senator?
Well, Senator Darcy said that you keep the title for life. She put it into the actual rules. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Senator Claytor, thank you.
So my question is
My
this.
wife won't call me Senator anymore.
My question is about how the MFP funding comes down to a given school district. And so if you're saying that the charter schools have taken the cream off the top and left behind students who have significant disabilities, then why isn't the extra MFP that goes towards students with disabilities following those students to the school wherever they are?
Oh, it is going to the schools. But I'm saying, since it's a weighted average, when the number of kids come out, since it's a weighted average, you're bringing with you a portion of that child's weighted average. I know it's kind of confusing, but we pour it all into this cup, and then we make the student count based on the average of all of them. So when one student comes out, he's taking the gifted part with him, he's taking the disabled part with him, he's taking the technical part with him or her. So because it's an average, that's why it's leaving with them.
But where does the average go? The average comes from Baton Rouge to the school district, and then it's not dispersed evenly? I mean, I don't understand where
the math on that.
Yes, where are we missing allotting extra funds for students with special needs wherever they go to school?
It's because it's a weighted average in the student count. If everybody's in the same school, and since charters are public schools, it's all in that pool for the public schools. But when you're taking kids out of the pool and putting them in a charter school,
which is still a public school,
they're taking the entire amount with them. But the reason for the bill originally was because they weren't taking the kids with exceptionalities. They were getting the money and none of the responsibility. And so we didn't want to make them 100% responsible at the same level. We said, how about 85%? You do 85% of what your district does, that would be fair.
Okay, because we're on a time limit, I'm going to just stop right now. But to be honest, the way I'm understanding this, you're actually making the case for the bill. So
well,
maybe
I'm
I
not
can chat with you
explaining it
later.
well in that particular
It's probably
instance.
my head. We've been here for quite a while today. But thank
Yeah.
you, Madam Chair. I'll relinquish the light for time.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashley McReynolds. I am a parent of an almost 18-year-old now that has been a student in East Baton Rouge Parish since he was 3. He has multiple disabilities and received special education services since he was 3. So just to sort of try and answer your question, Representative Amity, how this bill originally got started back in 2015 was trying to deal with the inequities in the MFP formula. And right now, the local share is still inequitable and allows the average weight that is carried by students with exceptionalities, gifted and talented, all of those that drive extra monies to provide them services. That full weight goes when students leave and go into charter schools. At the time, there was about 88%, if I remember my math right, in 2015. And when we applied the 85% rule, about 88% of charters did not meet the 85% criteria in 2015. So they were taking more than their share of the MFP because they were getting the add-on weights on top of just your base student per pupil formula. But they were not accepting students with exceptionalities, and specifically those with significant cognitive disabilities. Now, those numbers have shifted. I know that the numbers in 2022 had all of the compliance rate around students with disabilities in the 85% rule was 66%. Of charter schools were meeting the 85% criteria. So this law has been successful. It has worked. As a parent, I very openly disclose to schools my child has a disability. If I'm having issues in a public school and I want to go to a charter school, I'm going to put all of that on the table and say, this is the issues I was having in the traditional public school. What can you do different? How does your related services look? How does it work? What can you offer me that cannot be offered to me in the traditional public school? All the parents that I talk to and work with, they're the same way. They're not going to hide that their child has a disability, especially if they're coming out of a difficult situation in a traditional public school. They're going to want the people that are going to serve their child to know this is what I'm bringing to the table. So I really have a hard time when people that have provided testimony before me saying that it's causing a difficulty for parents not wanting to disclose. I don't know a single parent that, and I know hundreds, that are going to be very willingly open to self-disclose, my child has a disability, this is what I'm looking for, what can you offer that the traditional public school hasn't been able to?
Thank you. And Rep. Edmonston, I'm going to have the last lady go first because we have 10 minutes before the floor, and then I'll recognize you.
Hi. Yes, Tanya Nyman again. I'm going to try to be intelligible in 3 minutes or less. It's a complicated issue. And I'm going to kind of just draw on an example in East Baton Rouge Parish, because to me it seems like this notion of this information being necessarily provided in an application is a bit of a smokescreen anyway. I think that Ms. McReynolds makes the good point that parents are generally open to disclosing that information. But besides that, we won't even have to require that. They can still require the charter schools to serve a commensurate portion of the population. BASIS came to East Baton Rouge, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago initially, and the CEO of BASIS, Peter Baranzan, I think, openly declared that he had no intention of abiding by this portion of the law. He did not have any intention of trying to serve a commiserate share of the economically disadvantaged portion of the population. And BASIS, as far as I know, still hasn't. We now have 2 BASIS campuses in East Baton Rouge Parish, and if I'm not mistaken, they only serve about 20 to 30% economically economically disadvantaged students. And they are able to get away with that by refusing to provide transportation or free lunch, or making it otherwise difficult for students from low-income families to be able to access those educational opportunities. So even if you were just going to require, and we've never been able to get BASIS to abide by that law, so even if you were going to just require BASIS to say, hey, BASIS, you're not doing a good job of educating people and communities about the opportunities at the school, or providing them the resources so they could access your educational offerings. How about you adjust that in your advertisement practices or your application enrollment period, and make sure you do the job that you were required to do by law in order to ensure that charter schools are fulfilling their original responsibility. They should be doing what public schools do, which is to serve the population. East Baton Rouge Parish has 76% of the public school students live in poverty. To only serve the 26% living in poverty in the middle of East Baton Rouge Parish, you've got to be doing some things to avoid that, right? And Washington, D.C. is a really good example for how this goes awry. Washington, D.C. has a dual public school system. They have a public school system and they have a public charter school system. And the public charter schools have an appointed board, right? Their board members aren't elected, and they have the ability to, one, locate in neighborhoods where their schools are not very accessible by a diverse population, whether that's class or race, and then they can also counsel out students if they require additional services, if they have disabilities that are expensive to provide. And so then those students end up back in the public school system without the adequate funds. And so they're back into really a separate and unequal school system because they've allowed this type of thing to happen. So we certainly shouldn't want to model that educational governance structure, and it's a real danger to eliminate this from the law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. We have 5 other cards that are in opposition, present, and do not want to speak, so I'm going to put those into the record.
Did Representative Edmondson have a question? Okay. Thank you.
And then we also have a white card present and would provide information, Caleb Moore. And Rep. Freiberg, would you like to come close on your bill? Sure. Okay, the 5 in opposition: Marcus Thomas, LAE, Cynthia Posey, Louisiana Federation of Teachers, Bryson Curtis, Self, Christy Curtis, Self, and Christina Martin, Self. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I knew we would have a robust discussion, and we did. And as I said before, I know the people that came up, and I respect both sides, the pro and the con. You've heard both sides. I do want to say to my friend and mentor, Senator Claytor, that we did not delete entire section 17.3991. We deleted one subsection of that. And I would like to say that if you want more information about the weight in the MFP, these 2 ladies can discuss that with you after the meeting. To the BASIS question and issue, BASIS is a locally authorized charter. If EBR had issues with how their charter is being run, they are the authorizer, and they could do something about it. So I would close by saying I think this is a step that we need to be taking at this time, and I would ask for your favorable vote.
Are you making a motion to
I would like to
favorably?
make a motion that you move this forward favorably.
With amendments?
With the amendment, yes.
Yes, okay. So Rep. Freiberg makes a motion to report 708 with amendments. Do I see any objections? No objections. HB 708 is reported with amendments. That is our last bill.
Thank you,
I want to thank all the committee members. I know it's been a long meeting, but thank you. Does anyone make a motion to adjournment? Rep. Carlson makes a motion to adjournment. Thank you so much.